When the treaty between Earth and the Kareth Empire was signed, everything changed. For the first time, humans were allowed to live side by side with one of the most powerful alien races in the galaxy. But even though the papers said we were allies, the truth was different. To the Kareth, humans were still fragile, still weak, still less than them. And that was how Kayla came into my life. She arrived on a quiet morning just after the rain. I still remember standing by the doorway watching her step inside my house for the first time. She was tall, her skin a soft shade of blue that shimmered under the pale sunlight. Her silver eyes moved carefully, not looking at me directly. She wore a simple robe, but she carried herself with the kind of grace that made every movement seem planned. She was introduced as my maid. That word felt strange, heavy, and wrong. But under the treaty, some Kareth were assigned to human households to help with integration. In truth, everyone knew what it meant. They were placed among us not as equals, but as reminders. A symbol that even in friendship, the Kareth would always hold the higher ground. Kayla spoke very little that first day. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, though she looked anything but weak. She simply asked where the rooms were, what needed to be done, and then she disappeared into her duties like a shadow slipping through walls. For hours I barely saw her. Yet every corner of the house carried her quiet presence. The sheets were folded neatly, the floor swept, the old wooden table polished until it shone. She moved like water, flowing through the spaces of my home, leaving behind order and silence. But something felt wrong. She was not only working, she was hiding. When I tried to speak to her, she lowered her head. When I asked her simple questions, she answered with short nods or single words. It wasn't rudeness. It was distance, like a barrier that she refused to let me cross. That night, I found her standing alone on the balcony. The rain had stopped, but the air was still damp, carrying the smell of wet earth. She stood with her hands folded tightly, in front of her, looking up at the stars. Her silver eyes glistened with a light that wasn't only from the sky. I hesitated before speaking. "Do you miss home?" Her body stiffened, and for a long moment she didn't reply. I thought she would remain silent as she had all day, but then softly, almost like a whisper carried by the wind, she said, "You humans, you are strange." I frowned, not sure what she meant. Strange? How? "You smile," she said, her gaze still locked on the stars. "Even when you are weak, even when you are afraid, you still smile." Her words carried no mockery, there was no cruelty in her tone, only a quiet sadness, as if she spoke not about me, but about something buried deep within herself. I wanted to ask more, but she turned away and walked back inside. The conversation was over. Still, that single moment stayed with me, because in that whisper, I had heard something the treaty never mentioned, something no law or rule could capture. Behind her silence, behind her careful steps and lowered eyes, Kayla carried a weight, a burden that no one else could see. From that night on, I began to notice the small things, how her hands sometimes trembled when she thought no one was watching, how her eyes avoided mirrors, how she worked without rest as if stopping for even a breath might bring punishment. And the more I saw, the more I realized she was not here by choice. She was bound by something deeper, something heavier than the word maid. She was a prisoner of her duty. But I also knew something else. The day would come when those chains would be tested. And when that moment arrived, I could not stand aside. For even if the galaxy saw me as weak, I was still human. And humans do not turn their backs on those who suffer in silence. That was the day Kayla arrived in my life. And though I didn't know it then, it was also the day everything began to change. The first days with Kayla were filled with silence. She moved through the house like a ghost, present, but never fully seen. Her duties were always done before, I noticed. Floors shined, clothes folded, meals prepared. Yet in all her efficiency there was no warmth. She worked not as someone living a life, but as someone surviving it. I tried to speak with her. At breakfast, I asked if she liked Earth food. She only nodded and lowered her eyes. When I asked if she missed her home, she answered with a single word: yes. After that, she stayed quiet. Her silence was heavy. It wasn't the quiet of peace. It was the quiet of walls. Walls built so high that no one could climb them. But one evening, something changed. It was late. The sun had slipped behind the horizon, leaving the sky painted in deep shades of purple and gold. I found Kayla, standing at the balcony again, her silver eyes fixed on the stars. There was a softness in her face I hadn't seen before, a trace of longing. I walked closer, unsure if I should speak, but before I could say anything, she spoke first. "My people do not look at the stars the way you do," she said quietly. I tilted my head. "How do they look at them?" "As distant fire," she answered, "as things to conquer, not as things to wonder about." Her words lingered in the air. I could feel the pain hiding beneath them. She wasn't only talking about stars. She was talking about her people, her duty, and perhaps the reason she stood in my house instead of her own. "You don't sound like them," I said gently. Her lips curved in something between a smile and sorrow. "That is why I am here." She didn't explain more, and I didn't push. But from that night, our bond began to grow. Little by little, Kayla allowed small pieces of herself to show. She spoke of her family once, though her voice trembled when she did. "They are proud," she said. "Pride is everything to us. If I fail in my service, if I dishonor the oath, they will carry shame forever." I didn't understand fully, but I could see how deeply it weighed on her. It wasn't fear for herself. It was fear for the ones she loved. That was her prison. She wasn't chained by walls or guards. She was chained by loyalty and honor. Still, moments of light broke through the cracks. One afternoon, while she cooked, I walked into the kitchen and accidentally startled her. She dropped a spoon and it clattered loudly against the floor. I bent to pick it up before she could. When I handed it back, our eyes met for the first time without her looking away. There was surprise in her gaze, then something softer, something almost human. "You do not treat me as others do," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "You're not a servant to me, Kayla. You're you." Her silver eyes lingered on mine for a long time before she turned away, but I noticed the smallest curve of her lips. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was the beginning of one. From then on, we shared small exchanges. She would ask about Earth, about the trees, the rivers, the strange music that filled the streets at night. I told her stories of my childhood, of laughter and games, of how humans found joy even in simple things. Sometimes she listened in silence, sometimes she asked questions, and once she even laughed softly. The sound was delicate, almost fragile, but it filled the room like sunlight. Yet beneath every moment I felt the weight she carried, the way she always straightened when speaking of her people, the way her voice grew quiet when duty was mentioned. It was clear she lived with two faces, Kayla, the maid bound by oath, and Kayla, the soul searching for freedom. And as I watched her, I began to realize something important. She wasn't only here to serve me. She was here to test herself, to hold the chains her people had wrapped around her heart. But the more I stood beside her, the more I knew. The chains were breaking piece by piece. She didn't know it yet, but she was changing. And perhaps, so, was I. Days turned into weeks, and Kayla continued her silent rhythm of work and restraint. She moved through the house with precision, her hands always busy, her steps quiet, almost floating. But I noticed things others might have missed. The small tremor in her fingers when no one was watching, the way her shoulders stiffened whenever duty or her people were mentioned, and the way her silver eyes sometimes shimmered with a sadness deeper than words could capture. I wanted to reach her, to understand her fully, but she kept her distance. She was polite, efficient, even graceful, yet her heart seemed locked behind invisible walls. Every time I tried to ask her about her feelings, she would answer with a soft, clipped, "It is nothing," or a subtle nod. Her words were brief, measured, like someone carefully hiding the storms within. Then one evening, as the sky faded into the dark blues of night, I found her in the living room, sitting on the floor, her knees drawn close to her chest. The house was quiet, only the soft hum of the old heater breaking the silence. Her hands rested on her knees, trembling slightly, and her gaze was fixed on the floor. I knelt down a little distance away, unsure if I should speak. "Kayla," I started softly. "Are you all right?" She looked up slowly, her silver eyes glistening with tears she had not noticed were forming. I am not used to weakness," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "If I show it, if I fail in any way, I bring shame to my family. I cannot allow it." I stayed silent, letting her words settle between us. She was not afraid for herself. She feared dishonoring her people, the pride of her family, the expectations placed upon her since birth. It was more than duty. It was a weight tied to her very existence. I do not want to be here like this," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I want to move freely, to speak freely, but my body does not obey me. Even when I want to run, I cannot. Even when I want to rest, I feel I must keep moving. I am bound." Her words hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't just about being a maid. This was about a life forced into chains that no one could see. And yet, she carried it with quiet dignity. She bore her burden alone because that was what her people demanded. I reached out my hand slowly, unsure if she would allow it. When our fingers brushed, her body stiffened, but she did not pull away. "Kayla," I said gently, "you do not have to carry it alone here. Not in my home. Not with me." Her silver eyes widened slightly, as if the idea was foreign, almost impossible. "It is and not allowed," she murmured, "and even here I cannot disobey." "But maybe," I said, my voice firmer now, "some rules are meant to be broken when they hurt someone, especially when it's you." For the first time, she looked at me fully. There was fear in her eyes, yes, but also something else. A flicker of hope, small and fragile, like the first light of dawn after a long night. She wanted to believe it, wanted to allow herself even a moment of freedom, but her chains held too tight. We sat in silence for a long time, just breathing in the quiet of the house. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the scent of wet earth from earlier rain. And in that silence, I understood the depth of her struggle. This was no ordinary bond between a human and an alien maid. This was the bond of someone who lived under the weight of duty, yet yearned for something beyond it. Freedom, choice, and maybe even trust. She whispered again, almost to herself, "I do not know if I can ever be free." I placed my hand over hers, feeling the warmth of her skin through the slight chill of the night. "Maybe freedom doesn't always come from leaving. Maybe it comes from someone standing with you while you face it," I said softly. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and for a moment I saw the person she could be, not the servant she was forced to be. Not the shadow of her people's expectations, but herself. Kayla, a soul worthy of care, respect, and love. And in that moment, I silently promised her that I would be there. I would stand behind her quietly, patiently until she could stand without chains, because she deserved it, and I would not let her bear the burden alone. The next morning, the house felt different. Kayla moved with her usual grace, but there was tension in her shoulders, a quiet heaviness in the way she carried herself. I noticed how her silver eyes darted toward the door every time a shadow passed outside, and the soft hum of the heater no longer felt comforting. Something was coming, something that would change the balance of our fragile trust. It arrived mid-afternoon, with the sudden presence of Kareth officials in black ceremonial uniforms. They entered without knocking, their tall forms casting long, cold shadows across the floor. Their eyes, sharp and unwavering, immediately fell on Kayla. "Your presence has been requested," one said in a voice that carried authority, sharp as metal. "You are to come with us for inspection." Kayla froze. Her hands clutched the edge of the table, and her silver eyes widened, reflecting not fear for herself, but concern for her family, for her honor. She looked at me, silently pleading, yet the weight of her oath pressed her down. She could not refuse them, not openly, not without bringing dishonor upon the ones she loved. "Kayla," I said softly, stepping closer. "You don't have to go alone." Her body stiffened. The official's gaze shifted to me, surprise flickering across their faces. One of them stepped forward. "This human interferes?" I squared my shoulders. "She serves in my home," I said firmly. "But she is not property. She is a person. If you want her to leave, you'll have to go through me first." For a brief moment, Kayla's eyes searched mine. I saw confusion, fear, and something fragile. A spark of hope she didn't know she could feel. She was used to obeying without question. No one had ever spoken for her before. The officials sneered, their voices sharp. "A human defending a Kareth servant? You forget your place." Kayla lowered her head, trembling, but she did not move toward them. I could see her muscles tense, her body screaming to obey, but something inside her paused. She had a choice now, and it was terrifying. "Stand still," one official ordered. "Kneel. Show your respect." She froze, her silver eyes wide. For years, her life had been built around obedience. Her strength had been measured by submission. Now, in the face of authority, she hesitated. Her lips parted slightly, but no sound came. She looked at me, searching for guidance, for permission to break the cycle she had always lived in. I stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to kneel," I said quietly, so only she could hear. "Not here. Not now. Not ever for them again." Her body shook, and her hands fisted at her sides. I could feel the tension rolling off her, tight and rigid as steel. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, she straightened. She looked at the officials not with fear, but with something else. Strength she had been hiding. Strength I had always seen, even when she didn't believe it herself. "I cannot kneel," she whispered. The officials froze, their authority shaken. One of them took a step forward, voice low and threatening. "You will bring dishonor to your family. You will regret this disobedience." Her body trembled violently. I could see the internal struggle, her oath, her pride, the invisible chains of duty trying to pull her down. She wanted to obey, to bend, to disappear under the weight of expectation. But I stayed behind her, steady and unwavering, silently, telling her she could be brave. The room was still for a long moment, filled only with the sound of her shallow breathing. Then, as if testing herself, Kayla took a small step back. Her head lifted, her silver eyes meeting mine for reassurance. She was not alone, and in that moment, the first true barrier broke. Not the chains of her people, they were still there, but the chains of fear that had held her heart captive. The officials finally retreated, their authority unable to overpower the invisible wall we had built together. Their steps echoed down the hallway, but the room felt lighter after they left. Kayla sank to the floor, her knees folding beneath her, hands resting on the cool tiles, tears pooled in her silver eyes. I did not obey," she whispered, her voice trembling. I thought I could not." I knelt beside her, letting my hand rest on hers. "You did," I said gently. "You stood, and you were strong, and you did not do it alone." For the first time, she looked at me not as a maid, not as someone bound to service, but as someone who could trust, someone who could finally feel safe standing on her own. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting warm streaks of light through the windows. And for the first time, Kayla let herself breathe, because she had learned something crucial. Even the strongest chains can be challenged when someone stands behind you. After the Kareth officials left, the house felt strangely quiet. Kayla moved through the rooms as usual, but there was a tension in her every gesture, a heaviness I could almost touch. Her silver eyes no longer wandered freely. They were watchful, alert, as if expecting the world to strike again at any moment. For a long time she avoided me. She carried herself like a shadow, silent and careful, but I could feel the tremor in her movements. Every small action, the way she folded the clothes, the way she placed plates on the table, was measured, precise, almost fragile. It was clear that the visit had shaken her, yet she refused to let it show entirely. I tried to speak, to ease the weight she carried. "Kayla," I said softly one evening, "you don't have to be afraid here. Not with me. You don't have to obey anyone who wishes to hurt you." She paused, her hands hovering over the edge of the table. Her silver eyes met mine for the briefest moment, then fell. I cannot forget my duty," she said quietly. "Even here I feel it in my bones. I feel the pull of my people, of the oath I swore. If I fail, if I do not obey, I bring shame. I bring dishonor to those I love." I knelt beside her, letting my presence speak when words could not. "You don't have to carry that alone. Sometimes, standing against duty doesn't make you weak. Sometimes it makes you stronger than they will ever understand." She looked at me then, truly looked, and I saw the struggle in her eyes, the battle between the chains of expectation and the desire to be free. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I want to be free, but I am bound. I cannot break away." Placed my hand over hers, feeling the warmth of her skin, the tension in her fingers. "Kayla," I said, "freedom is not only the absence of chains, it is the courage to stand even when they try to hold you down. You don't have to fight. Alone, I will stand behind you." Her body trembled, but slowly, imperceptibly, she straightened. Something in her shifted. It was subtle, almost invisible, a small spark of strength igniting beneath the fear. For the first time, I saw her not as a servant bound by duty, but as someone who could choose her own path. That evening, a stronger test arrived. A message from her superiors came through the communicator, a demand for her immediate presence. The words were formal, but the tone was sharp, like steel against fragile glass. Kayla froze, her body rigid. Her eyes reflected fear, guilt, and the heavy weight of an impossible choice. They expect me to leave now," she whispered, barely audible. Her hands gripped the communicator as though it were a weapon and a prison at the same time. "If I refuse, everything my family has worked for will be destroyed. They will be dishonored, and I will carry that shame forever." I reached for her, placing my hands gently on her shoulders. "Then we will face it together," I said firmly. "You do not have to obey blindly. You have a choice now. Stand with me, and you can face them as yourself, not as a shadow of their expectations." Her silver eyes filled with tears. For a moment she trembled, the invisible chains around her seeming to grow tighter. I could feel the pull of years of duty, of generations telling her to obey, to kneel, to endure without question. Then, slowly she inhaled, her chest rising and falling as if summoning every ounce of courage she had ever hidden. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a fierce determination in her eyes. "I will not kneel," she said, voice shaking but strong. "I will not obey those who seek only to control me. I will stand." I nodded, silently proud, letting her feel the support I offered. The decision was hers, but she would not face it alone. The room seemed to shift, charged with a new energy. Fear was still there, but so was courage. Chains might remain, both seen and unseen, but Kayla had begun to break them, not with force, not with rebellion, but with a simple, powerful choice. She refused to be broken. And in that refusal I realized something profound. Strength does not come from domination or authority. Strength comes from the courage to stand when the world expects you to fall, and from knowing someone will stand behind you, unshakable and true. That night, Kayla finally allowed herself to breathe. For the first time, she was not simply following orders, she was choosing, and the spark of freedom, small but undeniable, had begun to glow inside her. The next morning, the air in the house felt lighter, but tension still lingered in Kayla's every movement. She moved through the rooms with her usual grace, yet there was a subtle stiffness in her shoulders, a hesitancy in her step. I watched her from the corner of the kitchen, noticing the way her silver eyes flicked toward the door every time it opened. She was still cautious, still bound by duty, but something inside her had shifted. That evening, the message from her superiors arrived again, sharper and more urgent. They demanded her immediate return, and the words carried threats. Her body stiffened as she read them. Her hands trembled slightly, and for a moment she lowered her head as if she could disappear into the floor. I cannot leave, she whispered, almost to herself. Her voice carried guilt, fear, and something heavier, decades of expectations she could not simply erase. I stepped closer. Kayla, I said softly, placing my hand on her arm, you have already made a choice. You stood yesterday. You refused to be broken. That strength is yours, and no one can take it from you. Her eyes met mine, wide and unsure, filled with the weight of her duty. But my family, she began, her voice breaking. If I do not obey, they will be dishonored. Everything I have worked for, everything they taught me, it will vanish. I shook my head gently. Honor is not only measured by obedience. Honor is measured by courage, by integrity, and by the choices we make for what is right. You have already honored yourself by standing, by refusing to bow when it was wrong. Her hands trembled as she set the communicator down. For a long moment, she simply breathed as if each inhalation pulled her further away from the chain she had carried for so long. I could see the storm of emotions inside her, fear, guilt, doubt. But beneath it all, a small light was growing. Then, slowly, almost painfully, she lifted her head. Her silver eyes shone with unshed tears, and yet there was a fierce determination in them I had never seen before. I will not run, she said softly, but with strength in her voice. I will not obey blindly. I will stand, even if it brings shame. I will not kneel. Her words hung in the air, heavy with power. The chains that had bound her, invisible but suffocating, began to crumble, not fully, not instantly, but enough to give her space to breathe. She looked at me, her body trembling but upright, and I felt pride swell in my chest. I knelt beside her, gently taking her hands in mine. Kayla, the chains that held you are weakening because you chose to face them, I said. You are not alone. You are free to choose your path, and I will stand behind you every step of the way. Her lips curved slightly, a delicate smile breaking through the tension. She let herself relax against my hand, allowing a single moment of trust, a single moment of relief. For the first time in what felt like years, she did not flinch, did not shrink, did not hide. She simply existed, strong, human in her emotions, yet fully herself. Hours passed, and she began to speak softly about herself, about her people, and about the heavy expectations that had shaped her life. She told me of her childhood, the rigorous training, the lessons in duty and honor, the endless repetition of obedience. Each story was a small release, a shedding of invisible weight. By the time the sun had set completely, she was smiling more, openly, her eyes shining with a clarity and warmth that had never been there before. The house, once tense and heavy, now felt alive with the energy of newfound freedom. I never thought I could feel this, she whispered. To not be afraid, to not obey without question. It is strange, but it feels right. I nodded, smiling back at her. It is right, Kayla, and you earned it. She leaned back against the couch, resting her hands over hers, and for the first time, I could see the real Kayla, the soul that had always existed beneath the chains. She was still strong, still proud, but now she carried a strength of her own choosing. That night, the stars shone brighter outside our windows, and Kayla stayed on the balcony a little longer, gazing at them, no longer silent, no longer afraid, She was learning to live for herself. She was learning to breathe freely. And I knew, with certainty, that the day her chains fully fell would come. She would not face it alone, and together we would stand, unshaken, in a world that had tried for so long to bend her. Because Kayla was no longer just a maid. She was becoming someone who could choose, someone who could fight, someone who could be free. The morning light spilled into the house, soft and golden, casting warmth on every corner. For the first time in weeks, the air felt calm, almost serene. Kayla moved through the rooms with quiet confidence, her silver eyes reflecting something I hadn't seen before, a lightness, a freedom, even in the smallest gestures. The message from her superiors came again, urgent and demanding as always. But this time it was different. She picked up the communicator, read the words, and set it down calmly. There was no tremor in her hands, no fear in her eyes. She had made her choice. She would not be forced into obedience by anyone, nor would she live bound by invisible chains of fear. I watched her silently, amazed at the transformation. The Kayla who had arrived weeks ago, fragile and careful, trembling beneath the weight of duty, had grown into someone who could stand for herself. She was no longer just my maid, she was my equal, my companion, my friend. "I will respond," she said softly, her voice steady. "I will tell them. I cannot comply. I must live my life by my own choices, even if it brings consequences." I stepped closer and placed a hand over hers. "Then they will have to accept it. You have already proven your strength." Her eyes shimmered with tears, but this time they were not only fear, they were relief, joy, and pride. She let herself breathe fully, without hesitation, without shrinking under the weight of expectation. That afternoon, she came to me and simply said, "Thank you." The words were small but heavy with meaning. They carried gratitude for support, trust, and understanding, a trust she had never given anyone before. I shook my head gently. "No thanks needed. You stood for yourself. I only stood behind you." Her lips curved into a full, genuine smile, delicate and beautiful. "I never thought I could feel this," she said. "To be free, to be myself, to not be afraid. And yet, I am." We spent the rest of the day together in quiet harmony. She cooked, yes, but now she did it by choice. She laughed at small mistakes, shared stories, and asked questions about Earth with curiosity instead of caution. Every glance, every word, every gesture revealed someone learning to live in a world she had once seen only as a prison. Later, she stood at the balcony, gazing at the stars. Her silver eyes glimmered, reflecting the infinite sky above, and I joined her silently. "You look different," I said gently. "Brighter." She laughed softly, a sound like a bell in the quiet night. "I feel different," she admitted. "I feel alive." I nodded. "You earned it. You chose to stand. You chose freedom. And now, no one can take it from you." She turned toward me, eyes filled with emotion. "I cannot describe how it feels to finally be able to choose, to finally be myself, without fear, without chains. I could not have done this alone." "You never had to," I said quietly. "And you never will. Not as long as I am here." For the first time, she reached out and took my hand freely, not out of duty, but out of trust and connection. I felt the strength in her grip, the confidence in her presence, and the bond between us solidified in that silent moment.